Your support, finding honest Native-centered news is not easy. But with your support, we're able to provide accurate information about Standing Rock, Line 3, treaty violations, and COVID-19 in our Native communities. Please visit Native Roots Radio Network on Patreon and donate if you can. That's Native Roots Radio Network on Patreon. Pinigigi, and thank you for your support.
Heart health is more than just the physical well-being. It represents like a foundation of vitality, resilience, and the ability to live fully.
Your heart carries stories of resilience, love, and survival. Caring for your heart means honoring yourself and the generations before and after you. It means protecting your ability to gather, laugh, and be present. Learn more about your heart health at hennepincounty.gov/heart-beats, because your story matters and your heart beats for generations. Hey, it's Robert Pilot from Native Roots Radio. For a meal that feeds your soul and health, check out Gatherings Cafe. Located in the renovated Minneapolis American Indian Center, Executive Chef Vernon Defoe and team serve up incredible indigenous flavors. Gatherings Cafe has amazing bison tacos featuring lean protein from native wise, corn tortillas, and homemade sides. It's fresh, local food rooted in ancestral knowledge. Stop by for breakfast or lunch. That's Gatherings Cafe, where tradition meets innovation.
This is Chase Iron Eyes announcing a new show on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, powered by Native Roots Radio. The show is called Native American Patriot Talk Radio. What will we do on the show? We are going to explore and dive into the source of American constitutional sovereignty, the intersection of Native American and legal issues. Find us the first and third Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m. on AM 950.
The city of Minneapolis is now on Native Roots Radio with Minneapolis AIR. AIR stands for American Indian Relations. Guest host Christine McDonald talks to people about important things affecting the city's Native communities. Minneapolis AIR dives into topics like public safety, public health, elections, and so much more. Tune in to Minneapolis AIR on Native Roots Radio from 5 to 6 p.m. on the second Wednesday of every month, right here on AM 950.
With your AM 950 weather, I'm Patrick Lilia. Tonight, cloudy with a low of 64, then Friday, sunshine with a high of 82. The Great Wall has been your home for Chinese favorites since 1981. Don't miss the sesame chicken, mushu pork with Chinese pancakes, or Peking duck. Stop in at the restaurant on France Avenue and 45th Street along the Minneapolis-Edina City line, or check them out at greatwallrestaurant.us.
Portions of Native Roots Radio may be pre-recorded.
It's a good day to be Indigenous.
Get up, stand up.
They are going to become more brutal.
Because all the hippies were trying to be Indians anyway.
They're going to become more repressive because it's a matter of dollars and their illusionary concepts of power.
Hey, Victor.
We must live in balance with the earth.
And also with recent happenings at Wounded Knee.
I am awake. Welcome to Native Roots Radio presents I'm Awake, and I'm your host, Wakanja Hade.
Well, Robert Pilot is away from the microphone tonight, and his guest host isn't Joan Rivers, it's David Cournoyer, and it's great to be with you all here on AM 950 and across Indian country and beyond on live stream Facebook. We are in for a treat tonight. Last night we heard from some Indigenous leaders, and we have some common ties because in Indian country there's only 2, maybe 2.5 degrees of separation. And one of my favorite things to do as a recovering TV reporter, so back in the day I worked at Channel 11 and a couple other places, and that was great training for, just talking and making stuff up like I'm doing tonight. But now when I transition into nonprofit work and community work with different nonprofits and foundations, meeting folks like our guest tonight was the best part of the job because they are innovators, they are influencers, they are change makers, and they're great people and a lot of fun. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. How do we help more people unleash their ideas and their energy and learn from each other, become teachers, become co-teachers, so we can let the ideas that we know are right here within us or right in the middle of the circle of all of us, how do we let those ideas out, flourish, and fly just like a baby chick. So here's our two our hens and roosters tonight. I'll let them introduce themselves. Lee Francis is well known in Indian country circles. He's got an educational doctorate, I think from Texas somewhere, right, Lee? And then
yes,
we'll hear from Lee, and then from another educator, innovator, influencer, doer, Brett Ramey, who's tuning in from Lawrence, Kansas, I think tonight. But Lee, let's hear from you. Who are you, Lee?
Well, thank you. Guatihapa, Tawashrap Lahiname Lee Francis, aka Dr. Indigenerd, Washesh Gawekame, Marikaname. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So I am Dr. Lee Francis the fourth. My family is from the Pueblo of Laguna, which is about 45 miles west of Albuquerque, New Mexico. On my dad's side, from the village of Powati that we call Quischi, at home, and mixed. My mom is just straight Missourian, right dead center in the country. I go by Dr. Indigenerd because I've spent a lot of my life really working with young people and how pop culture connects up in terms of learning, and ways that intersects, because I'm a big nerd. I love games and comics and everything in between, anything pop culture, sci-fi, fantasy. It's what I grew up with. And so I wanted to carve out a space for Native folks and Native young people to be able to be a part of that. So I founded the Indigenous Comic-Con. I founded Red Planet Books and Comics. I put together a number of comic books about a number of topics throughout the last 10 plus years. My PhD is in education from Texas State University. So it's really just different ways of teaching and exploring and getting, our communities excited about who they are, about their representation, about these amazing stories that we have to tell, that people just, the general pop culture sphere of Americana tends to push a lot of those stories to the side. So that's what I love to do. And that's what I keep working on.
And it's really exploded since what we heard on the intro there, right? It's the great movie Smoke Signals, which I think was seminal, right? Because there wasn't all these options, and comic books and Instagram and all these little chat channels, right? The gamers have their chat channels. And so Native people are influencing all of those. And we'll hear more in a minute from Lee, because he's got his little tentacles in just about everyone. Brett Ramey, I don't know what we call you, Brett, because you work with plants, you work with youth, you work with tribes, you work with the outdoors, and you're right there in your backyard. So who are you?
All right. Yeah. Well, good to see you here, David, and meet you too, Dr. Lee. Mito we dawe inganike, bachoje tunapi kiraje woki goida hahuke. So my name is Brett Ramey. I'm a Iowa or Bachoje, Bear Clan. And so, yeah, I'm talking to you today from Lawrence, Kansas, Kaw territories. Behind me here, that's the levee that's just on the edge of the Kansas River, across the river from downtown Lawrence, Kansas, which most people on this call or on the show probably know about Lawrence by being the home of Haskell Indian Nations University. You're talking about 2.5 degrees of separation Indian country. Haskell might be 1.5 degree of separation, maybe. So this is where I call home. This is where I kind of pivot off of for the work I do, both official work and unofficial work, life. And so I just got back about 20 minutes ago from up in White Cloud, which is the Iowa reservation, which is where about roughly half of my work is focused up there. Where my title is a climate resilience planner, but what that looks like on the ground is getting to support a lot of our restoration efforts, both cultural and land restoration. So yesterday, for example, we were out in our community prairie area, about a 4-acre, smaller restored prairie area behind our admin building, behind our health clinic, spending time with about 10 young folks as part of their summer youth employment program. We're out on the prairie, and we were together, from my understanding, the first time in known memory for me, out there harvesting sage together from this community prairie zone. So that was a really powerful moment, just getting that opportunity to have them come out with us, to hopefully support them in understanding what their relationships are to that particular plant, what that plant's relationships are to that particular prairie, what that prairie's relationships are to our broader work to restore our cultural and ecological landscapes as Iowa people, and doing it in a way that comes at a time where, those are the types of medicines we need. That medicine, not just of the sage, but the medicine of being together on the land. And so that's what I was able to do yesterday, call it work. We'll probably get a little bit more into that, but that's part of my work. And then another layer of my work is getting to kind of pull out a little bit, work at kind of a national level, getting to lead a funding program that's explicitly for Indigenous and community color-led food and farm work, and do it in a way that really shakes up how we think about funders and how we relate as funders to people on the ground, reducing a lot of the barriers around, unnecessary reporting and necessary applications, and really doing it based more on trust and understanding of what people are actually doing on the ground, and just trying to remove those barriers to get resources to folks and help them connect across to keep doing the work they do. And so really those are kind of the two parts of my lives that really feed off each other. My on the ground work, doing prairie restoration, working with young people, informs my work of being kind of a funder, but then being part of those larger national conversations helps support my work on the ground, so I don't get too insular and myopic with just hanging out with plants all day. So that's kind of the short of the intersections that I try to navigate across on the day-to-day.
Very cool. So you're both teachers, you're both influencers, and there's so many ways this conversation could go. I know, Brett, you went to Haskell Indian Nations University for a time. I met you at a different tribal college 14-ish years ago. And about that time, right, 15, 20 years ago, traditional plants as food as medicine was really starting to take off. Sean Sherman, the sous chef, was still, right, he was still doing it all, driving, cooking, prepping. I mean, he might have had one person helping him, but not, owning a restaurant on the Mississippi riverfront now like he is today. So it's amazing what's happened in the last 15 years. And it just seems like a lot of that. I remember one of those chefs, his name was Nephi Craig, and one of your contemporaries, Valerie Segrest, had him come to Muckleshoot, and she convened all of the chefs on the reservation, because they're all getting boxed food from Cisco and from the typical places, right? And then they have to turn it into healthy eating and to think about traditional plants. And Nephi Craig, Apache, literally cooked something with the stones of the river from where he's from. And that sort of, I don't know, the aroma was part of the meal, right? Mm-hmm. When he brought that off, you could literally smell this food, right? So when we come back, we will talk about what it takes to look inward and all kinds of other ways to create change in Indian communities. Thanks for listening to Native Roots Radio. We'll be right back.
The city of Minneapolis is now on Native Roots Radio with Minneapolis AIR. AIR stands for American Indian Relations. Guest host Christine McDonald talks to people about important things affecting the city's Native communities. Minneapolis AIR dives into topics like public safety, public health, elections, and so much more. Tune in to Minneapolis AIR on Native Roots Radio from 5 to 6 p.m. on the second Wednesday of every month, right here on AM 950.
If the statistics say that 1 in 3 Native women and 1 in 6 Native men have experienced sexual assault in their lifetime, it means our whole community is affected by sexual violence. 1 is too many. Don't stand by, stand up. Don't engage in acts of sexual violence, and shut down the dirty jokes, the gossip, the victim blaming and shaming. As a community, we can change the way we respond. Contact the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition to attend a workshop to learn more.
Sponsored by the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition.
Hey, it's Robert Pilot from Native Roots Radio. For a meal that feeds your soul and health, check out Gatherings Cafe. Located in the renovative Minneapolis American Indian Center, Executive Chef Vernon Defoe and team serve up incredible indigenous flavors. Gatherings Cafe has amazing bison tacos featuring lean protein from native wise, corn tortillas, and homemade sides. It's fresh, local food rooted in ancestral knowledge. Stop by for breakfast or lunch. That's Gatherings Cafe, where tradition meets innovation.
culture prevents so many negative things from happening to us as individuals and as communities.
Strong roots begin with a healthy heart. For Indigenous women, heart health is part of caring for community, culture, and future generations. Even small steps can help protect what matters most. Discover ways to support your heart at hennepincounty.gov/hearts-beats, because your heart beats for generations.
Oh, this is Dallas Goldtooth, and you're listening to the Native Roots Radio. Hoka Hicha Wecha.
Welcome back to Native Roots Radio presents I'm Awake, and this is Robert Pilot.
I think Dallas is a good example of what we're talking about tonight, and that is unleashing innovation, unleashing learning, and how do we help other people find their sweet spot, right? So that they can unleash all their gifts, all their best thinking, all their energy in order to propel the circle forward. Dallas is a smart guy, right? He went to Berkeley, I think. I know he went to the Native American Prep School. So, you know, he's not just somebody reading his lines, right, on the TV. Brett, what's your experience in how do you help people be comfortable so that they can take in knowledge, so that they can be co-teachers, so that they can find their voice, right, even? And maybe what was your experience and how did that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in any sort of role that I try to assume, I try to model what I respond well to. So if I'm thinking about other people that I've learned from, that have supported me in my journey, then I do my best to kind of emulate if or when I can. But really, I think it's less about that than it is just helping supporting young people to find that connection to their own lands. And so I've tried as best I can just to follow those leads. And I think that can take the form of literal on the ground, land like we were yesterday, and just supporting young people to be like, okay, we have different activities throughout the day, from sensory activities to drawing to a little like theater skit where we like kind of ask them to do things like that. And so just kind of having different inlets for people to really find something that they're comfortable with, and hopefully in that comfort entry point, then they can maybe be exposed to some of these other growing edges that they might have. Because I know that's how I've always kind of entered spaces, is like, you want to have a little bit of comfort coming into things, but also not be so comfortable that you're not growing and expanding. And so just knowing that I've responded well in that way, I just try to model that as best I can, especially for young people, because it can be too much at once sometimes. And when we're like yesterday, we designed it to be for like young boys and girls club, but ended up we had a lot of high schoolers. And so some of the things of like, put on your deer ears or whatever is like a little too young for the grown-up ones, but like we still kind of made them do it anyway. And just to like watch them finally at the end of the day, after like poke them enough, like, all right, I'll put on my deer ears, I'll drop my like cool teenage kid armor for a minute. I still don't think they were really feeling it that much, but for that split second, we kind of cracked in there and opened it up a little. There you go.
Well, I've heard elders before tell us, right? Be a kid again. Try to find your inner child, and I think that's part of it, right? How do you help people be comfortable and curious and not afraid to ask questions and not embarrassed that they don't know things? Mm-hmm. Being a kid is not Lee Francis's problem at all, and I think that's part of his genius, Lee, part of your genius. But I mean, I literally have heard a software engineer say it was watching the movie Star Wars that got me interested in computers and how things work. So yeah, taking kids outside is huge, but they're also on their phones and they're also watching stuff every night. And so that could be an entry point too, right? To help them find their genius. What's worked for you in doing that?
When I first started teaching 20 some years ago, I've been a technophile since I was a kid. My dad had an old TRS-80. Thank you very much. Any of you out there that remember the old TRS-80 from Radio Shack? We had that in the household. My dad loved programming databases. And so I grew up in a tech household. But I think the important part was how to find that balance between technology and tradition. So when I was teaching, it was that technology is at use for our tradition, our beliefs, our interaction, our relationships. That's always been sort of the fundamental approach for me, is that, it's not technology for technology's sake. It's how do we utilize these things to allow us to connect further and deeper with our ancestors, with our elders, with our young people. So for example, in terms of finding that spirit, we used to take kids on trips. That's always the fun part, right? Brett, you're talking about take them out, they do the deer ear. It's high school kids, they're all, everybody's a cynic. Everybody's, like they're all whatever. But at a certain point, you develop that rapport and they're like, I don't do the thing because you're doing the thing and I actually like you, right? So we used to take kids on these long trips. And we had some young people that went out at one point. We took a group of 30 kiddos snowboarding as one of our early programs. And it was a leadership program, right? Because it's scary to go down a mountainside. So part of it was, how are you taking risks? How are you experiencing this world? And I had one student come up to me and was like, can I go back to the room? I was like, man, come on already. Like, we barely just got out here. I thought you of all people wouldn't want to go back to the room. He's like, no. I want to go back and get the camera because I want to film my colleagues and put a video together about all the stuff that they were doing. Now, this is before you could just pop your phone up. It's 20 years ago, right? So even then, this idea of technology and service is so, I think, important to understand. Technology in service of community, technology in service of, how do we bring our heart to these spaces? And I think that's, a ton of what I try to do when I talk about, sparking the Indigenous imagination, right? It's that idea of how do we find those moments that take us away from cynicism, that pull us away from a narrative of tragedy and despair that's been ingrained in us for 400 years. So how do we do that? Well, I always look at superheroes, I look at pop culture, and finding the joy and the celebration in that. Like, how do we find that? And then how do we bring in our young folks into these spaces? How do we bring them in? Because they live in a pop culture world. They live in a surrounded community and society and existence. And so how do we bring that back for them and allow them to journey with us? So that's always kind of the way that I've always tried to approach that. And, have had, I want to say, good success. I think it's been great. I leave that up to the readers and the viewers, the young folks doing amazing things. And hopefully it was something that sparked for them in their journeys. So
and when you tell these cynics, right, these kids that, who've taken swallowed the story that, Indian people, we're 1 point whatever percent, and we have very little to offer the world. And, they're wowed by their feeds and how many likes and all the things that kids want to do. How do you help remind them, oh no, we have some cool stuff that we've done and that we're doing? What do you point to?
I think I point to, the people in their community. I point to their grandmas and grandpas. Back in my education academic days, I did a bunch of interviews with Native folks in my community and other locations. And I asked them where they learned from. And this was all age ranges from just out of high school all the way to 70s. And I said, where did you learn the most from? And to a person, they all said grandma or grandpa. Right. So this idea of that wisdom and that knowledge, but it's just those interconnections in that relationship. So I think the cynical part is broken down when we remind young folks of those connections to grandma and grandpa, to to our elders, and not as a mythical elder piece, right? Because that's the other part. We always hear it's our elders are, they're native elders, not our elders, native elders. They're magical. They do whatever. And I was like, Guys, all elders are magical. They got like lots of wisdom. Go talk with them, have a story, sit down for a second, right? I think that's the same for us. So do I think my grandma magical? Yeah, absolutely. But not in some sort of westernized, fantasy fairy tale of native existence. I think it's good that you get the chance to kind of sit down. And I think that helps when you think about where you learn from. I think that helps sort of break through with that. And then also meeting the kiddos where they are, right? They live in this world. I'm aging out. So, I need to meet them. They're the ones that have to deal with phones and the AI and all these other things. And so reminding them, I think going outside, like go outside for a second, take a picture, go back and show it to grandma. She's going to love it. So it's just balancing that and reminding them to go deeper into their own spaces.
In the minute we have, Brett Ramey, who does a lot of work with kids and plants and outdoors, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, you just had me thinking about the years I lived in Flagstaff and how I, initially went there around, meeting with the Forest Service around this protection of the San Francisco Peaks or Doco Sleet for this proposed ski area expansion. And in doing that, spending a little time and seeing, 50, 60, 100 high school kids showing up for marches to protect that mountain. But then also, so there's kind of this partial, resistance to the things that threaten sacred sites, that threaten our existence. But then on their other hand, like literally had cameras, doing stories, documenting the protests, but also making like vampire movies, and then really building gardens around town and painting murals, kind of reclaiming that visual space and doing it in a way that's just like completely driven by the types of things you're talking about. Like, yes, informed by elders, but also just driven by these really dope young people who were inspired by this mountain and inspired by the creativity that was kind of bestowed on them by the land and their elders and everyone in between.
Great story, Brett. We'll be right back on Native Roots Radio, everyone. Thank you.
Hey, it's Robert Pilot from Native Roots Radio. For a meal that feeds your soul and health, check out Gatherings Cafe. Located in the renovative Minneapolis American Indian Center, Executive Chef Vernon Defoe and team serve up incredible indigenous flavors. Gatherings Cafe has amazing bison tacos featuring lean protein from native wise, corn tortillas, and homemade sides. It's fresh, local food rooted in ancestral knowledge. Stop by for breakfast or lunch. That's Gatherings Cafe, where tradition meets innovation.
We are your relatives.
We are your relations.
Brothers,
sisters,
sons,
daughters.
And some of us are your grandchildren.
We are your community. Historically, we held places of honor and respect. Because of the impact of colonization, some of us are rejected, thrown out from family, friends, and community, set up as targets for sexual violence, sex trafficked, humiliated, tortured, and murdered. Everybody has the right to be safe. We are your relatives. Remember,
homophobia is not traditional.
Sponsored by the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition.
Maintaining our health, particularly our heart health, is very important to us as a family.
Your heart gives you time with family, time with community, time to pass down what matters. Protecting your heart helps keep those moments alive. A visit with a healthcare provider can be one step toward a healthier future. Learn more at hennepincounty.gov/hearts-beats. Your heart health is essential because your heart beats for generations.
This is Chase Iron Eyes announcing a new show on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, powered by Native Roots Radio. The show is called Native American Patriot Talk Radio. What will we do on the show? We are going to explore and dive into the source of American constitutional sovereignty, the intersection of Native American and legal issues. Find us the first and third Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m. on AM 950.
The city of Minneapolis is now on Native Roots Radio with Minneapolis AIR. AIR stands for American Indian Relations. Guest host Christine McDonald talks to people about important things affecting the city's Native communities. Minneapolis AIR dives into topics like public safety, public health, elections, and so much more. Tune in to Minneapolis AIR on Native Roots Radio from 5 to 6 p.m. on the second Wednesday of every month, right here on AM 950.
Hey, it's Patrick for Zero Res. There's a lot happening in July. It's America's 250th birthday. Aquatennial is also coming to Minneapolis later this month. You've also got beach days, fishing days, time spent on the playground with the kids. So what are you coming home to at night in terms of your carpet cleanliness? If the answer to that is questionable or worse, then you need my cleaning heroes at Zero Res to come help get things in order this summer. If your carpet's looking more like a snowbank in late March, muddy, crunchy, and kind of mysterious, it's time to call Zero Res. This month, get 3 rooms of carpet cleaned starting at just $139 and get your air ducts cleaned starting at $599 per unit. Schedule your appointment at ZeroResMinnesota.com or call 9520-RES and say you want the AM 950 special. Back order forward spells the same. Zero Res. With your AM 950 weather, I'm Patrick Lilia. Tonight, cloudy with a low of 64, then Friday, sunshine with a high of 82. The Great Wall has been your home for Chinese favorites since 1981. Don't miss the sesame chicken, mushu pork with Chinese pancakes, or Peking duck. Stop in at the restaurant on France Avenue and 45th Street along the Minneapolis-Edina City line, or check them out at greatwallrestaurant.us. This is AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
You're listening to Native Roots Radio. I'm Bobby Wilson. Witcha.
Welcome to Native Roots Radio presents I'm Awake, and I'm your host, Wakanja Hade.
Well, Robert Pilot has turned over the microphone tonight to this pitiful Indian man, but I'm really buoyed tonight by being with 2 Native American geniuses. Lee Francis joining us from North Carolina, whose roots are in Laguna Pueblo, New Mexico, and Brett Ramey, whose Wi-Fi is acting up there. Brett is, I didn't know he was in Arizona for a time, but Brett works with his tribe, the Iowa of Kansas and Nebraska, and we'll get back to him in a minute. I didn't know he had spent some time in Navajo country. So much of this is, I mean, there's so much to learn, right, Lee? And now iPhones have really changed everything in terms of what we have to teach kids. It used to be kind of drill and kill, right? Memorize this, and who was the first president, and what, blah blah blah. Anymore, you can really look up a lot of this stuff, and that doesn't mean we don't learn some of that. But it seems to me, the education system hasn't really switched from memorization and standards based to what the long list of what people think they need to know, to really inspiring learning and that love of learning. And Brett, you're trying to get young people, who didn't want to do the bunny ears, that's funny, or the deer ears, to be kids again, after they've often been burned in public education, right? And not to pick on teachers, because teachers are not the problem. It's often a system, right? It's a way of trying to prepare kids for life that seems not right for kids. So how do you try to keep kids engaged, get their attention, and help them de-school sometimes, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to pull back to one of the core issues for us, which relates both our education system and also our agricultural system on our reservation, is looking back at the original missions after our final treaty that relocated us to where we are now. And the way that I've heard one of our elders talk about, how we used to plant in mounds because we're stronger that way, and then once we, and similar to if you plant corn in straight rows, maybe they're not as strong because they're all standing there as individuals in a straight row. Whereas traditionally planted in mounds, there's 4 to 6 seeds put together, like you're in a mound, like you're locking arms together. And the same thing with our education systems. We went from collective learning in mounds, in community collectively, to sitting in straight rows with one person at the front pushing their knowledge out. And that's shifting. We're seeing that shift where we're seeing different ways of organizing classrooms. And so there is some attunement to the need to not just have the one at the front with these individualistic ways of thinking. So that said, the ways that we try to shift our education is largely based on what I was able to be part of when I lived in Seattle, which was an Indigenous STEAM camp, which you actually visited one time, I think, David. And we would house at a Daybreak Star, the Native Cultural Center there in Seattle, and it was all about land-based knowledge. There were families involved. It was always led with story, and really just trying to support young people to be the own guides of their knowledge and of their interests. And one of the grounding teachings, which was something we would hear a lot from Roger Fernandez, a renowned Lower Elwha and Musqueam storyteller artist, based occasionally in the Twin Cities now, is that if you teach everybody the same thing, then you don't need each other anymore. And so there's something really, really profound about that, to where we make sure that does then allow for people to follow those interests, like both Lee and I were talking about earlier, to pursue kind of niches that we're inspired by, that we actually want to dig in deep on. And that's in direct opposition to the standardized schooling model now, where we're basically teaching people in rows, whether it's still literally in rows or if they shifted or not, but it's ultimately towards nation state objectives, which is, whatever the goal is at that time of that particular school district, often to create somebody who's willing to fall in line, which as Native people, we know that that's not really been the way forward. That's allowed us to continue to thrive and survive in these systems by just like acquiescing and sitting in those straight rows, and following kind of the lead of that straight row thinking, but instead creating outlets and inlets for young people or all people to contribute their knowledge and to follow kind of pursuing their own interests towards the larger whole of contributing and being part of that collective mound of knowing, of learning, of growing.
I love that quote from Roger, right? Wow. If we all know the same thing, yeah, just stay home and watch your internet all night, right? Lee, you're doing the same type of work, and before we went to break, Brett was talking about vampires on the edge of the Navajo Nation, and that's sort of what you do every day.
Yeah, I think that part of exploring, these very spaces of how not only how we're sort of asserting ourselves in popular culture by playing and tinkering with a lot of these other stories and mythologies and folk tales and traditional tales. All of that mixing together is something, I think that's part of the genius, is that we've brought a lot of that in. And I think that's something that it's again sort of following where young folks want to be as well. They're going to let you know those particular spaces once that ball gets rolling, because I think part of that capital industrial educational complex, the straight rows and this direction, is that it is very much about limiting the imagination. It's engineered that way. It's not about green spaces. It's not about planting. It's not about exploring and cultivating. It's not about going out in the world. It's about doing a form. It's about rote memorization. And there is a certain level of practice that is needed to be sure, to make sure that you've mastered something. But in any of these instances, we've had places to play and explore and just sort of see what's going to happen. And I think that's been the brilliance of Native folks. We just kind of see, and we've learned, and we watch, and we observe. And so in all of those spaces, then when you figure out how to tell the story, well, then that's where, for me, the fun comes in, because then you get the chance to tell that story, through vampires, or we've got a really great horror group with Native folks right now telling just some cool, scary stories, and superheroes and space rangers and monster slayers, all these things, right? So I think there's a part where it's meeting young people, and also, that sort of generative learning, which is cool. Tell me a story. I'm not going to shut you down. I want your imagination to go wild. Tell me the story about the vampire. Let's figure out some of the intricacies of that world build. Because I think I think that's the core of it. If we can get young folks to think about how they can build fantasy worlds, then they can also build their own worlds in that space too,
Mm.
right? Then they have the mechanics to look out into their communities and say, how can we build this in a way that it will be beneficial to the next generation, to my, not only just, like my ancestors and elders, but my younger brothers and sisters and grandkids and great grandkids and so on, right? So I think that's where all that comes in. You can use vampires to tell really great stories. You can use space and robots to tell really great stories and analyze all of these questions and things that happen in our worlds. And then how do we use those then as a practice to play the sandbox to then affect that kind of change in our own communities, in our own worlds?
So I should say my day job is working for ACES, as you know, Lee and Brett, which promotes science, technology, engineering, and math for Indigenous people. AISES, check them out. And at my first conference in 2014, this is an ACES post-it note, 3M company, right, that Minnesota Manufacturing and Mining, they were there, recruiting people for 3M jobs, and they sponsored the student luncheon. And at each student's plate, they put out post-it notes and tape and protective glasses and earplugs and all the stuff, the expensive stuff that 3M sells as little offerings to the student. But then they had these nicer gift boxes, and they didn't know how to get rid of them. And I'm just like, well, why don't we just let the students, these 300 Native American students, make something with the stuff you put at their plates? And the most creative designs, they can have a box. OMG. Those kids went nuts. And of course, they weren't going to listen to any of the speakers from 3M telling you how great it would be to work at 3M. They went crazy making this stuff out of their heads, to just do it. And so they had the space, they had the freedom, they had the materials, right? And so much of it is the right materials, yeah? 80 kids got up with ideas, from 3M tie to an ASUS cell phone holder to Wally with the robot was a thing back then. The 3M engineers were blown away by Indigenous creativity. So I saw with my own eyes, and we kept doing that the next couple conferences. Brett, what do you love about your work, and what's the sweet spot for you? And give us a teaser, and we'll come back and we'll finish your story after the break.
Yeah, I think it's finding points of urgency in the world that we're facing right now, whether it's the need to confront an extractive industry, whether there's something kind of bubbling up at like the more like social cultural level in our community. They're like really, is really kind of one of the signs of the times we're in. And then through that, finding ways to address them in ways that both kind of holds off the need in the way that I talked about, protection of that mountain, but also creates that opportunity to lift up the ways that we've always navigated through uncertainty. We've always navigated through different forms of climate change, whether it's cultural, ecological, and doing that in a way that can ultimately provide paths forwards, not only for our own communities, but ultimately lead by example to the rest of the country, the rest of the world, as an example of Indigenous, what Dan Wildcat calls Indigenous indigenuity.
Brett Ramey, thank you very much. We'll be right back with Brett and Lee Francis. You're listening to Native Roots Radio.
Heart health is more than just the physical well-being. It represents like a foundation of vitality, resilience, and the ability to live fully.
Your heart carries stories of resilience, love, and survival. Caring for your heart means honoring yourself and the generations before and after you. It means protecting your ability to gather, laugh, and be present. Learn more about your heart health at hennepincounty.gov/heart-beats, because your story matters and your heart beats for generations.
This is Chase Iron Eyes announcing a new show on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, powered by Native Roots Radio. The show is called Native American Patriot Talk Radio. What will we do on the show? We are going to explore and dive into the source of American constitutional sovereignty, the intersection of Native American and legal issues. Find us the first and third Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m. on AM 950.
The city of Minneapolis is now on Native Roots Radio with Minneapolis AIR. AIR stands for American Indian Relations. Guest host Christine McDonald talks to people about important things affecting the city's Native communities. Minneapolis AIR dives into topics like public safety, public health, elections, and so much more. Tune in to Minneapolis AIR on Native Roots Radio from 5 to 6 p.m. on the second Wednesday of every month, right here on AM 950.
I heard sex trafficking happens a lot in Indian country. What is that?
Here are some of the real reasons why sex trafficking happens in Indian country. Unequal gender roles that were forced on us by colonization. Communities don't have enough resources. Silence around domestic and sexual violence. Lack of attention and justice for missing and murdered Indigenous people. There's a lot of behavior that keeps our communities out of balance. These are just a few true reasons why Native communities are targeted by traffickers. When these acts of violence happen in our communities, it opens us all up for exploitation.
Sponsored by the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition.
Hi, it's Dr. Evan Adams, and you're listening to Native Roots Radio. Hey, Victor, you better be listening.
In this portion of the show, we like to bring awareness to our wolf and bear populations throughout Turtle Island. Say no to the hunts.
Oh, Wendy Pilot, we miss you and Robert. They're off today. David Cournoyer standing in for them. I'm literally standing. It's kind of nice. I've been standing today. And joined by, aren't they just full of experience? And they're still so young, these two. Lee says he's about to tune out, but hey, you're 10 years behind me. And I think Brett's going the other way. So he's becoming more teenage-like every day. They're living off the land in Kansas. Thank you for your great examples and the great quotes. I'm still sitting with the one from Roger Fernandez from Washington State, one of the Slalom tribes, I think. Laura Elwa, as you mentioned, Lee, that if we teach everybody the same thing, or was that Brett who mentioned Roger? If we teach everything the same thing, you know, what's the point, right? And I think you really nailed it, right? This country went to an agricultural system, right, and then to an industrial system, and it was, you know, just make these wedges and widgets, and let's just build tanks and keep industrializing. And now we're in this era where AI is changing the ball game, and we really need thinkers, right? My algebra teacher, and who liked algebra, but I was good at it, he said, algebra teaches you how to think, right? It's the variables of A plus B equals E, and then you've got to figure out when they change, right? Well, now if E is different or B is different, what changes? And our kids can do it. Our kids can do math. It's maybe the way we're teaching them, right? And how do we get out of those rows? It makes no sense to compartmentalize, right? Oh, here's 45 minutes for this class and 45 minutes for that class, right? The world is holistic, and our kids know that too. Lee, what are some fun ways that you've had to really unleash Indigenous imagination? I know you've talked about bookstores and Comic-Cons, and you got all kinds of digital. So for toot your own horn, what you got coming up?
The biggest thing we got coming up is we're going to be launching a new Native kids educational magazine. So think of like Highlights, or think of, what is it, like Cricket or Nat Geo Kids. Too often our folks aren't in those spaces for our kids to really see, except for like Thanksgiving. We got a lot of Thanksgiving. We got a lot of representation in Thanksgiving. So, and you tend to see the same Native folks highlighted very often in those stories. So for us, we want to create another publication where kids can explore and they can see themselves and they can see other cultures and other communities and other Native folks that have done, this amazing incredible work, with each other. So that's our big publications coming up. And then the rest of the time, we just keep trying to find opportunities to, keep promoting joy. I love the idea. I love coming back to like cosplay, getting to dress up like your favorite characters, finding all these ways to do different variations on art. I do like my side hobby and sort of side hustle is puppetry. So we have a deep history of Native puppeteering. And I guess what the more academic term is object manipulation. But we've been doing this for thousands of years. And so I love to be able to think about how to create more of that. I have a puppet show on YouTube called Sovereignty Gardens with Native puppets where we teach about gardening, taking care of your gardens, family, community. So I love sort of Muppet style, but marionettes, things like that. I just think it's, great ways to keep exploring and experimenting and bringing out, as much joy as we possibly can take into our communities.
Brett Ramey, you talked about working with your tribe, the Iowa, and this other work with funding some innovation around the country. What's on your plate coming up? I know you're busy with your own garden and your own yard this summer, and it's been really, really hot. So what's the next 6 months or a year look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, so increasingly, we meaning Iowa people, we've had a lot of people reaching out to us from the state that bears our name, Iowa, and really wanting us to be more involved in things happening there. And so one of the primary projects I mentioned earlier is our prairie restoration project, and we call that Tanji Gri, which literally means prairie returning or prairie coming home. And so that both means, literally doing prairie restoration projects on our reservation, but then it also means us returning back to the prairie. So prairie coming back to our lands and us going back to the prairie, and the identities as Iowa people that emerged from those landscapes that are our traditional territories, which is essentially, Twin Cities down into what's now Iowa, northern half of Missouri. And so that has meant that we increasingly have partnerships with places like Effigy Mounds National Monument, which is in the bluffs above the Mississippi River, just south of the Minnesota-Iowa line. It's our sister park to our Iowa Tribal National Park. And so we've had increasingly more opportunities to be part of projects there to not just get our people back to those lands, to hopefully support the restoration of some of those landscapes by bringing cultural fire into them, by helping inform USGS water monitoring projects to do it in a way that doesn't just invite us to be part of them and doing things as they do them, but also making sure that we're incorporating our protocols and our practices if we are to go into these waters to harvest plants, harvest fish, to look at the safety of them, to see if we can begin eating those foods out of our traditional rivers and lands up there. And so those are things that I'm really excited about, is that opportunity to return to these landscapes, both for that current restoration, health, supporting the health of them now, but what does it mean for us as Iowa people to return to those ancestral lands, to maybe begin some of that healing that is needed from being forced to leave them before we were ready to. What did those grandmas feel like when they had to leave those territories, and what sorts of kind of embedded, not just trauma, but ways of how we relate to the land in our current reservation are a result of those severances of those land relationships from our traditional territories. And so how can we heal backwards through current work that we're doing while also building a healthy future, not only for our reservation lands and how we relate to our land and take care of the land now through prairie restoration, but also looking backwards into the necessity of looking at those original wounds and the sources of those initial severances of our lands as a necessity towards building forward to a healthy future as well.
Very nice. Thank you. So our learning and innovation and wisdom just go outside, right? Just talk to grandma, talk to an auntie, go to Lee Francis's, tell us your Instagram, Lee.
Find me as Dr. Indigenerd. It's all across the board. So check me out at Dr. Indigenerd. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Threads. Hit me up.
And is it Brettelstein? Sting, Brett?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
I thought so. Brett
Nettle
does-
sting, but Brett, nettle sting.
Nettles, those stinging nettles. I get it now. I get it. And when you go outside, Brett, with that nice lighting, it's very Clooney-esque lighting on you. Very Clooney-esque.
Very true.
Nice.
That's what we were
nice.
going for. That's what we were going for here.
Yeah, good job. No, I really appreciate it. I was hanging out with folks like you last week at an Indigenous science meeting in Albuquerque. And, you two would have fit right in. Actually, Lee knows a bunch of them, but it's exactly what you were doing for Northwest Indian College when I met you, Brett, 2013. And it's really impressive to see how you guys just keep doing it. You do it. It's something inside you that just keeps pushing and, going where the little rivulets are going to take you and sharing as much as you can with folks, including pitiful, humble people like me who all I can do is just babble and try to connect the dots. So thank you so much. Any shout outs before we go, Lee, Brett, to people, your moms or girlfriends?
Shout
or
out to all
anybody?
the aunties and uncles and grams and grandmas and, home community. Yeah, Goik, represent, Goik Kame. So
Thank you. Brett?
Same. I'm sure my mom will watch this at some point. Hopefully we can get some of those young folks yesterday to watch and they can revisit those deer ears in their shout out. I'm sure they're practicing at home in their mirror right now.
Well, you say hi to Rosemary Clooney. We all miss her on the big screen. Thank you so much for joining Native Roots Radio. David Cournoyer. I think pilots should go on vacation more often, huh? Nah. Robert, we miss you. Wendy, we miss you. It's been a great discussion about innovation, learning, and sharing, and really right, finding your center and finding our purpose and finding that sweet spot, right, to help everybody with their contributions and skills and not just the same learning, right? Lee, Brett, all of us have things to offer, and part of it's just listening, right? Part of it, hey, what do you think? What do you know? Where do you want to go? Thanks for watching, tuning into Native Roots Radio, AM 950, and on Facebook, and we will see you down the road. Good night.
The city of Minneapolis is now on Native Roots Radio.